supper. The Harmon family Thanksgiving dinner of 2023 unfolded like a carefully orchestrated theater production, one where everyone knew their roles except for two unwitting performers. Dominic Harmon and his 12-year-old son Caleb sat across from each other at the ornate mahogany dining table that had been in the Fletcher family for generations. The table groaned under the weight of a traditional feast. A glistening 20-pound turkey, cranberry sauce that Beatrice Harmon swore was completely homemade despite the telltale ridges from the can, and her signature sweet potato casserole topped with a precise arrangement of marshmallows. As the family settled into their seats, Dominic noticed it immediately. Every place setting had the proper arrangement of silverware, except his and Caleb's. Before them lay only knives and spoons, an absence that spoke volumes in the silent language of domestic warfare. Dominic looked up, meeting his wife's eyes across the table. Beatrice's perfectly manicured hand lifted a crystal wine glass to her lips, hiding what might have been a smirk. At 42, she remained stunning. Honey blonde hair falling in soft waves to her shoulders, her green eyes bright with a sharpness that had once attracted him but now filled him with unease. "Something wrong, Dom?" she asked innocently. "We don't have forks," Caleb said, frowning at his plate. Beatrice's sister Naomi let out a theatrical laugh. "Oh, silly me. Did I forget to set those?" She didn't move to correct the oversight. Dominic remained silent, studying the faces around the table. Beside Naomi sat her husband Percy, a corporate lawyer who had been inexplicably distant in recent months. Beatrice and Naomi's parents, Wallace and Marilyn Fletcher, occupied the heads of the table, Wallace looking uncomfortable, Marilyn impassive. "Just use your hands," Beatrice suggested with a dismissive wave. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the light as she reached for the wine bottle, pouring herself a third glass before dinner had properly begun. Naomi leaned forward, the neckline of her designer dress dipping dangerously low. "These dogs don't deserve silverware anyway." She winked at Beatrice, who responded with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The table fell silent. Even Percy had the decency to look embarrassed. Dominic felt Caleb's questioning gaze on him, the boy's fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over his plate. It was then that Wallace Fletcher caught Dominic's eye and gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The older man's weathered face revealed nothing, but the gesture was unmistakable. Dominic reached below the table, his fingers finding what Wallace had promised would be there, a small leather portfolio secured with a brass clasp. He slid it onto his lap, careful to keep it hidden from the others. "Something amusing, Dom?" Beatrice asked, noticing his changed expression. Dominic smiled politely, just thinking about how revealing traditions can be. He turned to Caleb. "Son, I believe there are extra forks in the kitchen. Would you mind?" As Caleb left the table, Dominic caught Wallace's eye again. The older man's message was clear: it's time. At 52, Dominic Harmon had built a reputation in security consulting through 20 years of methodical work. His firm specialized in detecting vulnerabilities, in systems, in organizations, and occasionally, in people. His clients valued his discretion as much as his thoroughness. What few knew was that before establishing his consulting business, Dominic had spent 8 years in military intelligence, where he'd learned that information was the most powerful weapon one could possess. He'd met Beatrice 15 years ago at a charity gala hosted by her father's investment firm. She'd been dazzling then, smart, ambitious, and seemingly genuine. Their courtship had been swift, their early marriage passionate. Caleb was born 3 years later, and for a time, Dominic believed he had everything a man could want. The first hairline fractures in their marriage appeared 5 years ago, coinciding with Dominic's decision to scale back his work hours to spend more time with Caleb. Beatrice had been increasingly absent, citing commitments to various charitable boards and social obligations. Dominic had accepted her explanations, focusing on his son and his smaller client roster. Now, as he sat at his in-laws' table watching his wife and her sister exchange loaded glances, Dominic knew the fractures had become chasms. The missing forks were merely symbols of a much deeper problem. Caleb returned with 2 silver forks, placing one before his father with a solemn expression that broke Dominic's heart. At 12, the boy was already learning hard lessons about dignity in the face of disrespect. "Thank you, son," Dominic said warmly. "Always important to be prepared, isn't it?" As the meal progressed, Dominic observed. He noted how Percy avoided eye contact with everyone, how Naomi's hand lingered on Beatrice's arm during whispered asides, how Wallace watched it all with a grim resignation. Only Marilyn seemed oblivious, prattling on about her garden club's recent drama. When dessert was served, pumpkin pie with fresh whipped cream, Dominic excused himself to use the restroom. Instead, he slipped into Wallace's study, opened the portfolio, and examined its contents. Inside were USB drives, printed financial statements, and photographs. A handwritten note from Wallace explained everything. Dominic, I've been watching and gathering evidence for months. I couldn't stand by any longer. This will give you what you need. The choice of how to use it is yours. Wallace. By the time Dominic returned to the table, his mind was clear. The path forward was brutal but necessary. He had always believed in accountability, and now, it was time for everyone at this table to face theirs. Is everything all right, dear? Beatrice asked, her concern as artificial as the centerpiece flowers. Never better, Dominic replied, sliding his fork into the pie with deliberate precision. I think things are finally coming together. As they drove home that night, Caleb sleeping in the back seat, Dominic made a promise to himself. The disrespect shown today was merely the culmination of years of betrayal. And if there was one thing Dominic Harmon understood perfectly, it was that every action had consequences. The leather portfolio sat heavy in his briefcase. Tomorrow, he would begin. Chapter 2. House of Cards. 3 days after Thanksgiving, Dominic sat in his home office reviewing the contents of Wallace Fletcher's portfolio for the 4th time. The evidence was comprehensive, damning, and explained so much about the past few years. The financial records showed a pattern of large transfers from joint accounts to private ones Dominic hadn't known existed. The photographs, taken by a private investigator Wallace had hired, showed Beatrice in intimate situations with not just one, but 2 different partners over the past 18 months. Most disturbing were the text messages. Wallace had somehow obtained records that revealed conversations between Beatrice, Naomi, and Percy, discussing Dominic and Caleb in terms that made his blood boil. Dom's completely clueless. He thinks I'm at the hospital fundraiser tonight. Percy says the trust fund can't be touched without Dom's signature. You need to work on that. I'll figure something out. He still trusts me completely. What a fool. And what about the kid? Caleb? He's Dom's problem once I'm gone. Dominic leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. The betrayal cut deep, but it was the casual dismissal of Caleb that truly ignited his rage. The boy was not a problem to be discarded. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Caleb stood in the doorway, uncertainty written across his face. Dad, can I ask you something? Dominic quickly closed the laptop. Of course, buddy. Come in. Caleb perched on the edge of the leather sofa, his lanky frame all awkward angles in the way of preteen boys. Why were Mom and Aunt Naomi being mean at Thanksgiving? About the forks and calling us dogs. Dominic studied his son's face, the earnest brown eyes so like his own, the determined set of his jaw. He'd always been honest with Caleb, but this required careful handling. Sometimes, people show us who they really are in small ways before they show us in big ways, Dominic said. That dinner was revealing. Is Mom mad at us? Not at you, Caleb. Never at you. But she is mad at you. Dominic considered his words carefully. Your mother and I are going through some changes. I think she's made some decisions that are going to affect all of us. Are you getting divorced? Caleb asked bluntly. The question hung in the air. Dominic leaned forward. Would that upset you? Caleb shrugged, but his eyes betrayed his concern. Tyler's parents got divorced last year. He says it's better now because they don't fight all the time. He paused. But you and Mom don't really fight. No, we don't, Dominic agreed. But sometimes silence can hide bigger problems. Like what? Dominic reached out and placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. I promise I'll explain everything when the time is right. For now, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Caleb nodded solemnly. Grandpa Wallace gave you something under the table, didn't he? Dominic couldn't hide his surprise. You saw that? I'm not a little kid anymore, Dad. No, you're certainly not. Dominic smiled ruefully. Your grandfather gave me some information. Important information. Is it bad? It's clarifying. Dominic squeezed his son's shoulder. Listen, things might get complicated in the next few weeks. If they do, I want you to remember that whatever happens between your mother and me has nothing to do with how much we both love you. Caleb seemed to consider this. But she doesn't, does she? Love me like you do. The question pierced Dominic's heart. Why would you say that? I heard her on the phone with Aunt Naomi. She said I was just like my father and not in a nice way. Caleb's voice was steady, but his eyes shimmered with unshed tears. And she never comes to my science competitions or asks about my coding projects. You're the only one who cares about that stuff. Dominic pulled his son into a tight embrace, anger coiling within him like a serpent. I will always be here for you, Caleb. Always. No matter what happens. After Caleb left, Dominic returned to the portfolio. Among the documents was information about Beatrice's most consistent lover, Roland Mercer, a wellness entrepreneur who ran a chain of high-end spas that had expanded rapidly in the past 2 years. With growing suspicion, Dominic cross-referenced the financial records and found substantial investments from Beatrice's private accounts into Mercer Wellness Properties. His phone buzzed with a text from Wallace Fletcher. Can you meet tomorrow? There's more you need to know. Dominic confirmed the meeting and began a methodical inventory of everything in the house that mattered to him. Important documents, irreplaceable mementos, items of sentimental value. He knew from experience that in situations like this, it was best to secure what couldn't be replaced before the storm hit. That night, as he lay awake listening to Beatrice's even breathing beside him, Dominic considered his options. Divorce was inevitable, but unsatisfying. The depth of the conspiracy against him, involving his sister-in-law, possibly his brother-in-law, and who knew how many others, demanded a more comprehensive response. Beatrice, Naomi, and their accomplices had spent years constructing an elaborate deception. They'd treated him with contempt while benefiting from his hard work. They'd dismissed his son, his brilliant, kind-hearted boy, as collateral damage in their schemes. No, a simple divorce would not suffice. By morning, Dominic had the outlines of a plan. If they wanted to play games, he would show them what it meant to play against a master strategist. As sun broke through the bedroom curtains, Dominic watched Beatrice stir awake, her face momentarily unguarded. "Morning," she murmured, reaching for her phone before even fully opening her eyes. "Sleep well?" he asked mildly. She nodded absently, already scrolling. "I have lunch with Naomi today, then that charity auction. Don't wait up." "Of course not," Dominic replied. "I never do." Something in his tone made her look up, eyes narrowed slightly. "Is something wrong?" Dominic offered his most benign smile. "Just thinking about Thanksgiving. It was quite memorable this year, wasn't it?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face before she composed herself. "Was it? Seemed pretty standard to me." She slipped out of bed, heading for the shower without waiting for his response. Dominic checked his watch. His meeting with Wallace was in 3 hours. By then, he would have already set the first pieces of his plan in motion. Chapter 3: The Architect's Blueprint. Wallace Fletcher looked older than his 74 years as he sat across from Dominic in a private room at the Westbrook Country Club. Once a commanding presence in Boston's financial sector, the man now seemed diminished, his shoulders hunched beneath his tailored suit. "I should have come to you sooner," Wallace said, his voice gravelly with regret. "I kept hoping it was a phase, that Beatrice would come to her senses." "How long have you known?" Dominic asked. "About the affairs?" "Nearly 2 years." "About the financial manipulations?" "Approximately 14 months." Wallace sighed heavily. "Marilyn doesn't know. She idolizes our daughters, particularly Beatrice. Finding out what they've been doing would destroy her." Dominic nodded, understanding the impulse to protect loved ones from painful truths. "And Percy? What's his involvement?" "Limited, but significant. As Naomi's husband and a corporate attorney, he's been advising them on legal matters, helping structure investments to conceal their true nature." Wallace hesitated. "He's not the mastermind, but he's certainly complicit." "And Roland Mercer?" Wallace's expression darkened. "That's where things get especially concerning. His wellness empire is largely smoke and mirrors. The spas are legitimate, but they're fronts for something more insidious. Money laundering? Among other things." Wallace pulled out a thin file folder. "Mercer has connections to some unsavory characters, people involved in modified pharmaceutical distribution. Nothing that would trigger DEA attention, but ethically questionable at best, criminal at worst." Dominic absorbed this information, filing it away. "And Beatrice knows?" "Not only knows, She's an active participant. She's been using her position on various charitable boards to facilitate introductions and create opportunities. Wallace's hands trembled slightly as he pushed the folder across the table. Beatrice and Naomi have been systematically draining family resources for Mercer's ventures. My retirement fund, their trust funds, and as you've seen, your joint accounts. What's their endgame? From what I've gathered, once they've extracted sufficient capital, Beatrice plans to file for divorce, claiming your work obsession led to the marriage breakdown. She'll seek full custody of Caleb, not because she wants him, but because it strengthens her claim to assets. Wallace looked pained. Meanwhile, she and Mercer plan to relocate to Costa Rica, where he's been developing a wellness retreat with her investment. Dominic's expression remained neutral, but his mind was cataloging each betrayal, each conspiracy, building a comprehensive picture of what he was facing. And Naomi? What's her stake in this? My daughters have always been competitive, but they're united in self-interest. Naomi stands to benefit from Roland's ventures, and she's always been jealous of Beatrice's lifestyle. Wallace hesitated. There's something else. Something I didn't include in the portfolio. He pulled a small voice recorder from his pocket and slid it across the table. Listen to this in private. It's a conversation between Beatrice, Naomi, and Mercer from 3 weeks ago. My private investigator planted recording devices in Naomi's lake house, where they often meet. Dominic pocketed the recorder without comment. Thank you for everything, Wallace. I know this can't be easy for you. They're my daughters, and I love them. But what they're doing is wrong. Wallace looked suddenly tired. What do you plan to do with this information? I haven't decided yet, Dominic replied evenly. But rest assured, I'll take appropriate action. Wallace studied him. That's what concerns me, Dominic. I've known you for 15 years. You're methodical, patient, and thorough. I've seen you systematically dismantle security threats for clients without leaving fingerprints. I'm afraid of what appropriate action might mean in this context. Dominic smiled thinly. You provided this information voluntarily, Wallace. Whatever happens next is on my conscience, not yours. Will you at least promise me something? Protect Caleb through whatever's coming. He's innocent in all this. That's one promise I can make without reservation. After leaving Wallace, Dominic drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of Boston. He'd maintained the unit for years, unknown to Beatrice or anyone else. Inside were supplies from his former life, surveillance equipment, secure communication devices, and other tools that might prove useful in the coming weeks. Among the items was a laptop configured for maximum security. Dominic set it up, inserted one of the USB drives from Wallace's portfolio, and methodically began organizing the information. He created files for each principal player: Beatrice, Naomi, Percy, Roland Mercer. He noted connections, vulnerabilities, pressure points. Next, he accessed a secure messaging platform used by former associates. He didn't directly reach out yet, but he updated his status to potentially available for consultation, a signal to certain individuals that he might require their specialized services soon. Finally, he listened to the recording Wallace had provided. The content confirmed everything he'd suspected and revealed additional details that made his blood run cold. Beatrice's voice was clear on the recording. Dom's always been so proud of his integrity, his principles. He has no idea how easy that makes him to manipulate. Once I file for divorce, I'll make sure everyone believes he's unstable, potentially dangerous to Caleb. His own reputation for being strictly by the book will work against him. No one will believe he could be set up. Roland Mercer's smooth voice replied. And the boy? Is he going to be a problem? Naomi interjected. Caleb's a weird kid, always tinkering with computers and robots. Beatrice can get full custody, extract maximum child support, then send him to boarding school. He'll be out of our hair. I almost feel bad for Dom, Beatrice said with a laugh. Almost. But he's been so boring these past few years, so predictable. He deserves what's coming. The recording ended there. Dominic sat motionless, allowing the full weight of their contempt to sink in. In that moment, any remaining doubt about his course of action evaporated. They thought him predictable, boring, easy to manipulate. They were about to discover how catastrophically they had misjudged Dominic Harmon. He spent the next several hours drafting detailed plans, considering and discarding various approaches until he found the perfect strategy. He would need help, trusted professionals who could execute specific tasks without asking questions. He would need time, several months to position everything properly. Most importantly, he would need Beatrice and her conspirators to believe they were succeeding right up until the moment their world collapsed. Before leaving the storage unit, Dominic made 3 calls. The first was to Vincent Lombardo, a private investigator who specialized in digital forensics. The second was to Martin Raines, an accountant with expertise in tracking complex financial maneuvers. The third was to Lucille Faulkner, a former colleague from his intelligence days who now worked as a reputation management consultant, a euphemism for someone skilled at crafting and destroying public images. Each conversation was brief, coded, and concluded with arrangements for secure meetings. By the time Dominic drove home, the first phase of his plan was in motion. Beatrice was already home when he arrived, sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of wine and her laptop open before her. "You're late," she observed without looking up. "Where were you?" "Meeting with a potential client," Dominic replied smoothly. "Big corporate security overhaul. Could be lucrative." She glanced up, momentarily interested. "How lucrative?" "6 figures, possibly 7, depending on scope." He kept his tone casual, knowing money was the easiest way to distract her. "Might require some travel, though." "That's fine," she said, returning to her laptop. "I have plenty to keep me busy here." "I'm sure you do," Dominic murmured. "Is Caleb home?" "In his room, I think. Doing whatever it is he does with those computers." Dominic resisted the urge to respond to her dismissive tone. Instead, he said, "I'm thinking of taking him on a father-son trip over Christmas break. Maybe skiing in Vermont." Beatrice waved a hand vaguely. "Sure, whatever. I have that spa retreat with Naomi anyway." "With Naomi. Right." Dominic moved toward the stairs, then paused. "Oh, I ran into Percy today, downtown near his office. He seemed tense. Everything okay with him and Naomi?" Beatrice's fingers stilled on her keyboard for just a fraction of a second, a tell most would miss. "As far as I know." "What?" "No reason. Just an observation." Dominic shrugged. "I'm going to check on Caleb." As he climbed the stairs, Dominic smiled to himself. The first seed of doubt had been planted. It wasn't much, but it was a start. By Christmas, Beatrice would be questioning everything. Her sister, her lover, her plan. By New Year's, the fissures in their conspiracy would be widening. And by spring, Dominic would be ready to deliver justice in full. Caleb's door was half open, blue light from multiple monitors spilling into the hallway. Dominic knocked gently. "Come in, Dad," Caleb called. The boy was surrounded by technology, 3 monitors displaying different lines of code, a partially dismantled drone on his desk, circuit boards and tools arranged in perfect order. At 12, Caleb had already shown remarkable aptitude for programming and robotics. "Working on anything interesting?" Dominic asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Caleb's face lit up. "I'm coding a facial recognition algorithm. It's still pretty basic, but I think I can improve the accuracy by modifying the neural network structure." Dominic felt a surge of pride. "That's impressive, buddy. Really impressive." "Mom says it's a waste of time," Caleb said quietly, his enthusiasm dimming. "She says I should focus more on sports, be more normal." "There's nothing wrong with being exceptional, Caleb. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." Dominic leaned forward. "How would you feel about spending Christmas break with me in Vermont? Just the 2 of us, skiing, maybe checking out some tech museums." "What about Mom?" "She has plans with Aunt Naomi." Caleb nodded, unsurprised. "I'd like that, Dad. A lot." "Good. It's settled then." Dominic stood, ruffling his son's hair. "Get some sleep soon, okay? And Caleb, I'm very proud of you. Never forget that." As Dominic left the room, his resolve hardened. Whatever came next would be difficult and messy. But for Caleb's sake, and for his own, he would dismantle this conspiracy piece by piece, exposing each betrayal and ensuring that those responsible faced consequences commensurate with their actions. The missing forks at Thanksgiving had been symbolic, a small humiliation intended to reinforce his perceived powerlessness. But symbols worked both ways. By the time Dominic was finished, silverware would take on an entirely new meaning for Beatrice and her co-conspirators. Chapter 4: Pawns and Players. Christmas Eve brought snow to Boston, transforming the city into a scene from a holiday card. Inside the Harmon residence, Dominic worked methodically, packing for the Vermont trip while Beatrice prepared for what she claimed was a ladies' spa weekend with Naomi. "You're sure you don't mind spending Christmas away from home?" Dominic asked, maintaining the fiction that he believed her story. Beatrice folded a cashmere sweater into her suitcase. It's just a date on the calendar. Besides, it's not like we've had traditional family Christmases lately. True enough, Dominic conceded, thinking of the previous year when Beatrice had spent most of Christmas Day on her phone, ostensibly handling a crisis for one of her charitable foundations. The past month had been productive. Vincent Lombardo had delivered comprehensive digital surveillance of Beatrice, Naomi, and Roland Mercer, including email and text message archives, financial transactions, and location data. Martin Raines had traced the complex web of investments connecting the trio, uncovering offshore accounts and shell companies. Lucille Faulkner had compiled detailed profiles on everyone involved, identifying vulnerabilities and pressure points. Dominic now possessed a complete picture of the conspiracy against him. Beatrice and Naomi had been systematically liquidating family assets and investing in Mercer's enterprises for nearly 3 years. Roland Mercer, far from being merely Beatrice's lover, was a sophisticated con artist with a history of seducing wealthy women and using their resources to fund his increasingly ambitious schemes. Most disturbing was evidence that Mercer's wellness centers were indeed fronts for distributing questionable supplements containing unregulated pharmaceutical compounds. Several clients had experienced serious health issues, only to be silenced with settlements and non-disclosure agreements. The plan to divorce Dominic, gain custody of Caleb, and extract maximum financial benefit was in its final stages. According to intercepted communications, Beatrice intended to file papers in February, after transferring the last significant assets to accounts Dominic couldn't access. "What time are you and Caleb leaving tomorrow?" Beatrice asked, interrupting his thoughts. "First thing, we should reach the lodge by noon." Dominic zipped his suitcase. "You know, it's not too late to change your plans. Caleb would love to have both his parents for Christmas." The subtle guilt trip was calculated. As expected, Beatrice bristled slightly. "Don't start, Dom. We agreed this works for everyone. Caleb will have plenty of Christmases." She checked her watch. "I need to finish packing. Naomi's expecting me by 8. Dominic nodded and carried his suitcase downstairs. In Caleb's room, he found his son carefully packing his laptop and various electronic devices. "Bringing your entire lab? I see," Dominic commented with a smile. Caleb looked up, slightly defensive. "Is that okay? I want to work on my projects during downtime." "It's more than okay. In fact, I might have some interesting programming challenges for you while we're there." Dominic sat on the bed. "Listen, Caleb, this trip is important. We'll have some serious conversations, and I might need your help with some things. Are you up for that?" The boy straightened, clearly pleased at being treated as a partner rather than a child. "Definitely. Is it about Mom?" "Partly. It's complicated, but you deserve to know what's happening." Dominic hesitated. "Some of it might be difficult to hear." "I can handle it, Dad. I'm not a kid anymore." Dominic smiled sadly. "No, you're not. Too grown up, too fast." He stood. "Get some sleep. Early start tomorrow." While Beatrice finished packing, Dominic made a final check of the surveillance equipment he'd installed throughout the house. Tiny cameras and microphones in common areas, keyloggers on all home computers, GPS trackers on vehicles, all feeding data to secure servers only he could access. The setup was legal in a gray area sense. This was his home, after all. The Vermont trip served multiple purposes. It would give him uninterrupted time with Caleb, allow him to explain the situation in an appropriate way, and provide an alibi for the first major move in his plan. As he checked the equipment one last time, his phone buzzed with a text from Lucille Faulkner. "Package delivered to RM response as expected." Proceeding to Phase 2. Dominic deleted the message immediately. Package referred to manufactured evidence suggesting that Roland Mercer was planning to double-cross Beatrice and Naomi, taking their investments and disappearing once the divorce was finalized. It wasn't true yet, but the seed of doubt would be powerful. When Beatrice came downstairs with her luggage, Dominic was sitting in the living room with a glass of scotch, the picture of a husband resigned to spending Christmas without his wife. "All set?" he asked. "Yes." She seemed distracted, checking her phone repeatedly. "Naomi's sending a car for me." "Fancy." Dominic took a sip of his drink. "By the way, I ran into Roland Mercer at the gym yesterday." Beatrice froze, her expression carefully controlled. "Oh, I didn't realize you knew him." "I don't, not really. We have mutual acquaintances. Dominic kept his tone casual. Interesting guy? Very smooth. Mentioned expanding his wellness centers internationally. Costa Rica, I think he said. Did he? Beatrice's voice was tight. I wouldn't know anything about that. Of course not. Why would you? Dominic smiled blandly. Just making conversation. Her phone chimed. My ride's here. She grabbed her suitcase handle. Have a good trip with Caleb. I'll see you in a week. No kiss goodbye, not even a perfunctory one. Dominic watched through the window as she hurried to the waiting town car, never looking back. Once the vehicle disappeared around the corner, he sent a text to Vincent Lombardo, subject be en route. Confirm surveillance active. The response came seconds later. All systems go. Full coverage established at destination. Dominic poured another scotch and settled into his chair. Across the city, Wallace Fletcher would be receiving an anonymous email containing evidence of Roland Mercer's plans to betray Beatrice and Naomi. Wallace, concerned father despite everything, would almost certainly warn his daughters. Meanwhile, Naomi would be finding irregularities in the accounts she managed jointly with Beatrice. Irregularities suggesting her sister was skimming funds. None of it was real, but all of it was plausible. When people were engaged in deception, they became particularly vulnerable to suspicions about being deceived themselves. Dominic checked the time. In about 3 hours, Roland Mercer would discover that several key permits for his Costa Rica property had been mysteriously revoked, requiring significant additional investment to reinstate. He would, naturally, pressure Beatrice and Naomi for more funds. The beauty of Dominic's plan was its elegant simplicity. He wasn't creating problems. He was merely accelerating existing tensions and weaknesses within their conspiracy. Greed, mistrust, and fear would do most of the work for him. Upstairs, he heard Caleb moving around, probably double-checking his packing list. Tomorrow, during their drive to Vermont, Dominic would begin carefully explaining the situation to his son. Not everything. Caleb was still a child, despite his maturity, but enough to prepare him for the changes ahead. Dominic's phone buzzed again. This time, it was Martin Raines, financial tripwires set. Any unusual activity will trigger alerts. Everything was in place. While Beatrice, Naomi, and Roland Mercer believed they were executing the final stages of their plan, they were actually walking into an elaborate trap years in the making. By the time they realized what was happening, it would be far too late. Dominic finished his scotch and went upstairs to check on Caleb. The boy was sitting on his bed, staring at a framed family photo from 3 years ago, all of them smiling on a beach in Cape Cod, Beatrice with her arm around Caleb, Dominic looking genuinely happy. That was a good day, Dominic said softly. Caleb nodded without looking up. Why did things change, Dad? What happened to make Mom different? Dominic sat beside his son, choosing his words carefully. People are complicated, Caleb. Sometimes they make choices that hurt others because they're focused on what they want. He gently took the photo and set it aside. But that doesn't mean you did anything wrong, or that you're not worthy of love. Is Mom going to leave us? Caleb asked bluntly. I think she's planning to, yes. There was no point lying. Caleb was too perceptive. But not because of anything you did. This is about her choices, not yours. What are you going to do? Dominic put an arm around his son's shoulders. I'm going to make sure you're protected, first and foremost. And then I'm going to make sure that people face consequences for their actions. Like punishment. Like justice, Dominic corrected gently. In life, we all have to answer for our choices eventually. Caleb seemed to consider this. Even Mom, Dominic confirmed. Now get some sleep. We have an early start tomorrow, and a lot to talk about on the drive. As Dominic left Caleb's room, his phone buzzed with an update from the surveillance system tracking Beatrice. She had not gone to Naomi's house as planned. Instead, she was at Roland Mercer's downtown apartment. Simultaneously, Naomi was shown to be at the lake house with Percy, not expecting Beatrice until tomorrow. The lies were multiplying, each one a strand in a web that would eventually entangle its creators. Dominic smiled grimly. Phase 1 was proceeding exactly as planned. Chapter 5, Queen's Gambit. The Vermont Lodge exceeded expectations, a luxurious mountain retreat with panoramic views, yet private enough for confidential conversations. Dominic had selected it carefully, ensuring it had both the amenities Caleb would enjoy and the security features he required. On their first full day, after a morning of skiing, Dominic took Caleb to the lodge's restaurant for lunch. At a corner table overlooking snow-covered pines, he began the conversation he'd been rehearsing for weeks. Caleb, do you remember what we talked about before leaving, about Mom and changes coming to our family? The boy nodded, setting down his hot chocolate. You said she's planning to leave us. That's right. But there's more to it than that. Dominic leaned forward. Your mother, along with Aunt Naomi and some others, has been involved in some dishonest activities. They've been taking money that doesn't belong to them and using it for their own purposes. Caleb's brow furrowed. They're stealing. In a sense, yes. They're also planning to make sure I lose everything in a divorce, including you. Me? Caleb looked genuinely shocked. But Mom doesn't even like spending time with me. It's not about wanting to be with you. It's about using you as leverage. Dominic hated having to explain such concepts to a 12-year-old, but Caleb needed to understand. If she has custody of you, she can demand more money from me. Anger flashed across Caleb's young face. That's not fair. No, it's not. Which is why I'm not going to let it happen. Dominic reached across the table, placing his hand over his son's. I have a plan to make sure they don't succeed, but I need your help. What can I do? For now, just be aware. If Mom starts asking you unusual questions about me, or trying to record conversations, or suggesting I've done anything inappropriate, I need you to tell me immediately. Dominic kept his voice calm. And I need you to trust that, no matter what happens or what you hear, I'm always acting to protect you. Caleb nodded solemnly. I trust you, Dad. There's something else. Dominic hesitated. I've arranged for you to stay with Grandpa Wallace for a few weeks in January. I'll have some business travel, and it's important you're with someone I trust. Not Mom. No, not your mother. Dominic squeezed Caleb's hand. It's complicated, but it's part of making sure everything works out right. After lunch, they returned to skiing. Dominic watched his son navigate the intermediate slopes with growing confidence, pride mingling with determination. He would protect Caleb from the worst of what was coming, but he couldn't shield him entirely. The boy was already part of this ugly situation, whether Dominic liked it or not. That evening, while Caleb was absorbed in coding on his laptop, Dominic received updates from his team. Vincent Lombardo reported that Beatrice had spent Christmas Eve with Roland Mercer, then traveled to Naomi's lake house Christmas morning, claiming her car had trouble. Naomi had appeared suspicious but accepted the explanation. More significantly, Martin Raines confirmed that the financial irregularities he'd created were having the desired effect. Both Beatrice and Naomi had logged into their accounts multiple times, checking balances and transaction histories. Roland Mercer had made urgent calls to his attorney after discovering the Costa Rica permit issues. Most interesting was Lucille Faulkner's report. The anonymous tips sent to various parties were creating exactly the atmosphere of suspicion Dominic had intended. Wallace had indeed warned Beatrice about Roland's potential betrayal, leading to a tense phone conversation that surveillance had partially captured. Meanwhile, Percy had started moving personal funds to accounts his wife couldn't access, a development Dominic hadn't anticipated but welcomed. The stress fractures were appearing faster than expected. Dominic sent new instructions to his team, accelerating certain aspects of the plan. By New Year's, the conspiracy would be showing significant signs of strain. On December 30th, as Dominic and Caleb prepared for their last full day in Vermont, Beatrice called. Dominic put the phone on speaker. How's your spa retreat? He asked innocently. Fine. Relaxing. Her voice was tight. Listen, I've been thinking. I'd like Caleb to come home early. There's a family thing with my parents tomorrow. Dominic raised an eyebrow at Caleb, who was listening intently. That's strange. Wallace didn't mention anything when I spoke to him yesterday. A pause. You talked to my father? Just checking in, wishing him happy holidays. He seemed to think you and Naomi were still at the lake house. Another, longer pause. We were. I meant we're planning something for when I get back. I see. Dominic kept his tone neutral. Well, Caleb and I have plans for tomorrow. The Science Museum in Burlington. He's been looking forward to it all week. Dom, I'm asking you to bring my son home. Beatrice's voice hardened. Our son, Dominic corrected mildly, is having a wonderful time, and will be home as scheduled on the 1st. He nodded to Caleb, who understood the silent instruction to leave the room. Once the boy was gone, Dominic continued. Is something wrong, Beatrice? You sound stressed. Everything's fine, she snapped. Just some family matters I need to address. Family matters that suddenly require Caleb's presence. after you've shown minimal interest in him for months? Dominic kept his voice even. Forgive me if I'm skeptical. You don't get to question my relationship with my son. Actually, I do when it affects his well-being. Dominic leaned back in his chair. Enjoy the rest of your spa retreat, Beatrice. We'll see you on the 1st. He ended the call before she could respond. Seconds later, his phone buzzed with a text from Vincent. Subject B in distress. Multiple calls to N&RM. Surveillance indicates financial emergency discussions. Perfect. The pressure was building faster than anticipated. Dominic called Caleb back into the room. Is Mom mad? The boy asked. She's dealing with some unexpected problems, Dominic explained. Nothing for you to worry about. She never calls me when she's away, Caleb observed. Not even on Christmas. I know, buddy. Dominic ruffled his son's hair. How about we add something special to our museum trip tomorrow? They have a robotics workshop in the afternoon. Caleb's face lit up, the tension of the phone call forgotten. While he returned to his coding project, Dominic sent a series of encrypted messages to his team, adjusting timelines and targets. The end game was approaching more rapidly than planned, but he was ready. That night, alone in his room after Caleb was asleep, Dominic reviewed the evidence he'd accumulated over the past month. It was comprehensive, damning, and would be devastating not just to Beatrice, Naomi, and Roland Mercer, but to everyone complicit in their schemes. He organized it into several packages, each targeted for specific recipients: law enforcement, financial regulators, the boards of the charities Beatrice had manipulated, Roland Mercer's business partners and investors, and most importantly, family court. Dominic had no intention of fighting a prolonged custody battle. When the time came, the evidence would ensure there was no battle at all. As he finalized the packages, Dominic received an unexpected call from Wallace Fletcher. They're panicking, Wallace said without preamble. Beatrice has been on the phone with her attorney all evening. Something about accounts being frozen and investments collapsing. Is that so? Dominic feigned surprise. Financial markets can be volatile. This isn't market volatility, Dominic. This is something targeted. Wallace's voice lowered. What have you set in motion? Nothing illegal, Dominic assured him. Nothing that wouldn't have happened eventually when their house of cards collapsed. Roland Mercer showed up at my house today, demanding to know if I'd interfered with his Costa Rica project. He seemed unstable. Dominic sat up straighter. Was Marilyn there? Are you safe? We're fine. I had security escort him out. Wallace sounded tired. But Dominic, this is escalating quickly. Beatrice is desperate, and desperate people make dangerous choices. I'm well aware. Dominic checked the time. Wallace, I need you to do something for me. When we return from Vermont, I'd like Caleb to stay with you for a few weeks. I have to travel for work, and given the current situation, I don't want him alone with Beatrice. Of course, Wallace agreed immediately. Marilyn would love the company, and the boys always welcome here. He paused. What exactly are you planning, Dominic? Justice, Dominic replied simply. Nothing more, nothing less. After ending the call, Dominic made one final check of the surveillance feeds. Beatrice was still at the lake house, engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument with Naomi. Roland Mercer was at his downtown apartment, pacing and making frantic calls. Percy was nowhere to be seen. Interesting, but not concerning. Everything was proceeding according to plan, albeit more rapidly than anticipated. The accelerated timeline would require adjustments, but the fundamentals remained sound. On New Year's Eve, as Dominic and Caleb enjoyed the museum and robotics workshop, the next phase was already in motion. By the time they returned to Boston, Beatrice and her co-conspirators would find their carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. Justice, Dominic reflected, was often portrayed as blind. But in his experience, true justice required perfect vision, the ability to see clearly both the offense and the appropriate response. What awaited Beatrice, Naomi, and Roland Mercer wasn't blind justice, but justice with eyes wide open. Chapter 6. The Approaching Storm. Boston greeted their return with freezing rain, the city encased in a treacherous glaze of ice. It was fitting weather for what awaited them at home. Dominic had prepared Caleb during the drive, explaining that things might be tense with Beatrice and reminding him of their agreement. The boy had nodded solemnly, a 12-year-old shouldering adult concerns with remarkable composure. The house was dark when they arrived, no sign of Beatrice despite her insistence that Caleb return. Dominic checked the surveillance app on his phone and saw she was at Roland Mercer's apartment. Had been there for hours, according to the timestamps. "Mom's not home?" Caleb asked, wheeling his suitcase into the foyer. "Apparently not." Dominic kept his tone neutral. "Why don't you get unpacked? I'll order pizza for dinner." While Caleb went upstairs, Dominic conducted a quick sweep of the house, checking for any signs that Beatrice had been searching his office or belongings. Everything appeared untouched, though he noticed she'd packed additional clothes, more than would be needed for a weekend retreat. He accessed the home security system and reviewed footage from the past week. Beatrice had returned briefly on December 29th, spent several hours in her home office, removed documents from the safe, and left with a larger suitcase than she'd taken originally. Interesting, but not unexpected. According to Martin Rains's latest report, the financial pressure was intensifying. Several accounts had been flagged for suspicious activity, a direct result of his strategic manipulations, and Roland Mercer's Costa Rica project was hemorrhaging investment after anonymous concerns about regulatory compliance were raised with key partners. Dominic ordered pizza, then made two important calls. First to Wallace Fletcher, confirming arrangements for Caleb to stay with his grandparents starting tomorrow. Second to Lucille Faulkner, authorizing the release of the first evidence package, financial records showing irregularities in the charitable foundations Beatrice managed, sent anonymously to board members and major donors. By the time the pizza arrived, Dominic had also received updates from Vincent Lombardo. The surveillance captured increasingly desperate conversations between Beatrice, Naomi, and Roland. Their alliance was fraying, with accusations of mismanagement and betrayal becoming common. Caleb joined him for dinner, the boy quieter than usual, but still animatedly describing the robotics workshop from their trip. Dominic listened attentively, treasuring these moments of normalcy amidst the gathering storm. At 8:42 p.m., the front door opened. Beatrice entered, looking harried and tense, her designer clothing slightly rumpled, very unlike her usual meticulous appearance. "You're back," she said, sounding almost surprised despite having demanded their return. As scheduled, Dominic replied mildly. "Pizza on the counter if you're hungry." She glanced at the box with distaste. "I've eaten." Her gaze shifted to Caleb. "How was your trip, honey?" Caleb looked to Dominic briefly before answering. "It was great. We went skiing and visited a science museum. I got to program a robot arm." "How?" "Educational," Beatrice said, her attention already drifting to her phone. "I need to make some calls. Don't wait up." As she headed toward the stairs, Dominic casually called after her. "By the way, your father invited Caleb to stay with them for a couple of weeks. I'll be traveling for work, and since you've been so busy with your charitable commitments, I thought it would be good for him." Beatrice froze mid-step. "That won't work. I have plans for Caleb. Family activities." "Now that's interesting," Dominic said, keeping his tone conversational. "Considering you've had minimal interest in family activities for months. What's changed?" Her expression hardened. "I don't appreciate your tone, Dominic. I'm his mother. I don't need to explain my desire to spend time with my son. Actually, under the circumstances, I think you do." Dominic stood, moving to stand between Beatrice and Caleb. "Caleb, would you mind giving your mother and me a moment?" The boy nodded, relief evident as he escaped the tension. Once he was upstairs, Dominic turned back to Beatrice. "Let's be honest with each other, shall we? You don't suddenly want quality time with Caleb. You want a bargaining chip." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Dominic crossed his arms. "The accounts are being flagged. The Costa Rica project is crumbling. Your carefully constructed exit strategy is falling apart, and you're scrambling." She paled slightly, but maintained her composure. "You're being paranoid, Dom. I've been at a spa retreat, not orchestrating some conspiracy." "Funny, because the Lake Charles Spa Resort has no record of your stay. Neither does any other spa within 100 miles of Naomi's lake house." Dominic allowed himself a small smile at her shock. "You should know by now that I verify everything, Beatrice. Professional habit. You've been checking up on me?" Her voice rose slightly. "What gives you the right?" "The same right you claimed when you and your sister called your husband and son dogs at Thanksgiving. The same right you exercised when you began dismantling our family for your benefit." Dominic kept his voice even. "I know everything, Beatrice. About Roland Mercer. About the financial manipulations. About the plans for divorce and custody." For a moment, Genuine fear flashed across her face before she regained control. You're making wild accusations based on what? Your paranoid security consultant instincts. Based on evidence. Substantial, documented evidence that's currently being reviewed by several interested parties. Dominic stepped closer. Caleb will be staying with your parents starting tomorrow. I've already packed his things. You can't do that, she hissed. I won't allow it. You're welcome to challenge the arrangement in court, Dominic replied calmly. Though I imagine you'll be quite busy dealing with the inquiries from the Westbrook Foundation Board about certain financial irregularities. The first emails went out about an hour ago. The color drained from her face. What have you done? I've done nothing but allow consequences to unfold. Dominic moved past her toward the stairs. Caleb leaves for your parents tomorrow at noon. I suggest you use the intervening time to consider your next moves very carefully. He left her standing in the foyer, phone clutched in her white-knuckled grip. As he reached the top of the stairs, he heard her furiously dialing, her voice urgent as she apparently reached Naomi. We have a problem. A serious problem. Dominic checked on Caleb, finding the boy already in bed with a book. Everything okay, Dad? Everything's proceeding as expected, Dominic assured him. Remember what we discussed. You'll be staying with Grandpa Wallace for a while, just until I sort things out. Mom didn't look happy about it. No, she didn't. Dominic sat on the edge of the bed. But sometimes adults need to make decisions that aren't popular to protect the people they care about. Caleb nodded, wisdom beyond his years in his eyes. Like when you check the security system 3 times before bed, even though it's already set. Dominic smiled despite himself. Exactly like that. Get some sleep, buddy. Big day tomorrow. Later, in his own room, Dominic monitored the surveillance feeds. Beatrice was in her home office, engaged in a 3-way call with Naomi and Roland Mercer. The conversation was panicked, accusations flying. Roland blamed the sisters for financial mismanagement. Naomi accused Beatrice of skimming funds. Beatrice suggested Roland had attracted unwanted attention with his side businesses. The tripwires Dominic had set were working perfectly, turning the conspirators against each other. Tomorrow would bring the next phase, the release of evidence to financial regulators regarding Roland Mercer's questionable business practices. Before sleeping, Dominic sent final instructions to his team. Everything was accelerating now, moving toward an inevitable conclusion. By the time Beatrice and her co-conspirators understood the full scope of what was happening, it would be far too late to change course. The next morning brought the first tangible consequences. While Dominic helped Caleb finish packing, Beatrice received a call from the Westbrook Foundation chairman requesting an emergency meeting regarding financial discrepancies. Her attempts to deflect were unsuccessful. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m., non-negotiable. Simultaneously, Roland Mercer called in a panic. According to the surveillance, financial regulators had frozen several accounts associated with his wellness centers pending investigation into potentially fraudulent health claims and improper pharmaceutical distribution. When Wallace arrived to collect Caleb, the tension in the house was palpable. Beatrice attempted a last-minute intervention, claiming she'd canceled her plans and could care for Caleb herself. That won't be necessary, Dominic said firmly. The arrangements are made. Caleb will stay with your parents until I return from my business trip. And when exactly is this business trip? Beatrice demanded. I leave tomorrow. The duration is uncertain. Dominic helped load Caleb's bags into Wallace's car. Could be a week, could be longer. Wallace observed the exchange silently, his expression grave. Once Caleb was settled in the car, he pulled Dominic aside. The foundation called Marilyn this morning, he said quietly. She's on the board. They're talking about a potential criminal investigation. Dominic nodded. Unsurprising, given what they'll find. This will destroy Beatrice. She made her choices, Wallace. Multiple times, over years. Dominic's expression softened slightly. Take care of Caleb. He understands more than he should have to at his age, but he still needs protection from the worst of this. Wallace nodded solemnly. And you? What exactly are you planning? It's better if you don't know specifics. Dominic clasped the older man's shoulder. Just keep Caleb safe. That's all that matters now. After they departed, Dominic returned to find Beatrice on the phone with her attorney, her voice tense as she described the foundation's concerns. She glared at him as he passed, covering the mouthpiece. Whatever you think you're doing, you won't get away with it, she hissed. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Dominic paused, meeting her gaze directly. Actually, Beatrice, it's you who never truly understood who you were dealing with. That's been your fundamental mistake all along. He continued to his office, leaving her speechless. The next 12 hours would be crucial. By tomorrow morning, Beatrice, Naomi, and Roland Mercer would be facing the initial wave of consequences: regulatory investigations, financial freezes, public scrutiny. But those were merely the opening salvos. What followed would be far more comprehensive, more devastating, and entirely inescapable. Dominic checked the time. The storm was approaching rapidly now, gathering strength. Those who had plotted against him would soon understand the true cost of their betrayal. And like the missing forks at Thanksgiving dinner, they would find themselves without the tools needed to salvage what remained of their carefully constructed lives. Chapter 7. The First Domino. January 3rd dawned clear and cold, a pristine winter day belying the chaos unfolding across Boston. Dominic, ostensibly departed on his business trip, was in fact ensconced in a downtown hotel suite that served as his command center. Multiple laptops displayed surveillance feeds, financial data, and news reports, while Lucille Faulkner provided real-time updates on the unfolding situation. The Westbrook Foundation has placed Beatrice on administrative leave pending investigation, Lucille reported, her efficient tone matching her sleek gray suit. At 60, the former intelligence operative retained the sharp focus that had made her legendary in their field. They've also hired forensic accountants to review all transactions from the past 5 years. Dominic nodded, watching a feed showing Beatrice pacing in her home office, phone to her ear, and the regulatory investigation into Mercer's wellness centers. Proceeding rapidly, the anonymous tip included sufficient documentation to warrant immediate action. 3 locations have been raided this morning, including his flagship in Back Bay. Lucille consulted her tablet. The pharmaceutical compounds found on-site have triggered DEA involvement. Perfect. Dominic checked another screen showing Roland Mercer being escorted from his downtown apartment by federal agents. What about Naomi and Percy? Percy filed for divorce at 9 a.m. today, citing irreconcilable differences. He's also cooperating with investigators, claiming he was unaware of the full scope of his wife's activities. Lucille's mouth twisted slightly. He's lying, of course, but he's cut a deal to minimize his exposure. And Naomi? Currently at her attorney's office, attempting to distance herself from both Beatrice and Roland. She's claiming she was merely following her sister's financial advice, unaware of any impropriety. Lucille raised an eyebrow. No honor among thieves, it seems. Dominic leaned back, satisfied with the initial results. The carefully constructed conspiracy was unraveling exactly as he'd planned, the participants turning on each other to save themselves. But this was merely the beginning. Implement the next phase, he instructed. Release packages 2 and 3 to the designated recipients. Lucille nodded, fingers moving deftly across her tablet. Done. Financial institutions will receive the evidence of money laundering within the hour. Family court documents will be filed by end of day. Excellent. Dominic checked the time. I'm going to visit Wallace and Caleb. Continue monitoring and update me immediately if anything unexpected develops. Will do. Lucille hesitated, something unusual for her. Dominic, I've worked with you long enough to know you're thorough, but this is exceptional even by your standards. You've dismantled their entire world in less than a week. Dominic's expression remained neutral. They spent years plotting to take everything from me, my son, my assets, my reputation. They were willing to destroy Caleb's security and happiness for their own gain. He closed his laptop. The response is proportionate to the offense. At Wallace Fletcher's Beacon Hill townhouse, Dominic found Caleb in considerably better spirits than expected. The boy was in the study with his grandfather, the two of them hunched over a complex circuit board project. Dad, Caleb's face lit up. I thought you were traveling. My schedule allowed for a brief visit. Dominic embraced his son, then nodded to Wallace. How are things here? Quiet. Until about an hour ago. Wallace gestured toward his desk, where his phone displayed numerous missed calls. Beatrice, Naomi, their attorneys. Even Roland Mercer tried reaching me. Have you spoken with any of them? Only Beatrice, briefly. She was distraught. Wallace looked troubled. She mentioned criminal investigations, frozen accounts. Said you were behind it all. And what did you tell her? That I gave you information months ago, and what you chose to do with it was your decision. Wallace glanced at Caleb, who was pretending not to listen. Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately. Dominic nodded. Caleb, why don't you continue working? Your grandfather and I need to talk. Once they were alone in Wallace's wood-paneled library, the older man poured 2 fingers of scotch for each of them. It's more comprehensive than I anticipated, Dominic. The foundation, the wellness centers, the offshore accounts. You've targeted everything simultaneously. Maximum impact requires coordinated timing. Dominic accepted the glass. Isolated problems can be managed. Simultaneous crises overwhelm defenses. It's brutal. It's just, Dominic corrected. Every consequence they're facing results directly from their own actions. I've simply ensured those actions are exposed. Wallace sighed heavily. Maryland is devastated. The foundation scandal is all over the local news, with Beatrice's name prominently featured. I regret any pain this causes you and Marilyn. Your innocent parties. Dominic's tone softened slightly. But Beatrice, Naomi, and their collaborators made their choices knowing the potential consequences. What happens next? The legal processes will unfold. Financial investigations, regulatory actions, possible criminal charges. Dominic sipped his scotch. I've filed for emergency custody of Caleb, with supporting evidence of Beatrice's unfitness as a parent. Wallace looked alarmed. You'll get no argument from me about Beatrice's maternal shortcomings, but using her legal troubles to secure custody feels exploitative. It's protective, Dominic countered. Beatrice planned to use Caleb as a financial pawn. I'm ensuring he remains with the parent who prioritizes his well-being. And the divorce? Papers will be filed tomorrow, citing irreconcilable differences and fraudulent behavior. Given the mounting evidence against her, Beatrice will have little leverage to contest the terms. Wallace studied him. You've thought of everything. That's my job, Dominic replied simply. Identifying vulnerabilities and neutralizing threats. These are your wife and in-laws, Dominic, not security risks. They became security risks the moment they conspired to destroy my life and use my son as collateral damage. Dominic finished his scotch. I should get back to Caleb. They returned to the study where Caleb was soldering components with impressive precision. The boy looked up as they entered. Grandpa's teaching me about analog circuits. It's pretty cool. Excellent. Dominic checked his watch. I need to head out soon, but I wanted to update you. Things are moving quickly with the situation we discussed. Caleb set down the soldering iron. You mean with Mom? Yes. There are investigations happening into some of her activities. It's likely to be in the news. Dominic knelt beside his son's chair. People might say things about your mother, about me, about our family. Remember what we discussed. The truth is more complicated than what others might see. Is Mom in trouble? Yes, she is. Dominic saw no benefit in sugarcoating reality. She made choices that have consequences. But none of this is your fault or your responsibility. Is she going to jail? Caleb's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his anxiety. I don't know yet. That will depend on many factors. Dominic placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. What I do know is that you'll be staying with me, and we'll get through this together. Caleb nodded, absorbing this. What about Aunt Naomi and Uncle Percy? They're facing their own difficulties. Dominic kept his explanation simple. The important thing is that you're safe and your future is secure. After promising to call later and thanking Wallace for his support, Dominic returned to his hotel command center. During his absence, the situation had developed significantly. Lucille updated him immediately. Roland Mercer is cooperating with authorities, offering information about Beatrice and Naomi in exchange for leniency. She displayed messages on her tablet. The financial institutions have frozen all identified accounts, and the family court has granted your emergency custody petition. Any unexpected developments? 1. Lucille looked grim. Beatrice attempted to access your home office, triggering the security protocols. When that failed, she tried to enter the storage unit you maintain. The surveillance system alerted local authorities to a potential break-in. Dominic checked the feed from his home. Where is she now? Being questioned by police. She claimed she was merely retrieving personal property, but given the timing and circumstances, they're taking a closer look at her activities. This wasn't part of Dominic's plan, but it fit perfectly. Beatrice's desperation was driving her to make critical mistakes, further undermining her position. Keep monitoring. I want to know the moment she's released. Dominic turned to another screen. What's the status of the Costa Rica property? Local authorities have suspended all development pending investigation into environmental violations and permit irregularities. The investors are in full panic mode, demanding explanations from Mercer's management team. Excellent. Dominic checked his watch. It's time for the final phase. Release all remaining evidence packages to their designated recipients. Lucille hesitated. That will effectively eliminate any possibility of damage control. They'll lose everything: careers, reputations, freedom. They were willing to do the same to me. Dominic replied evenly. The difference is they conspired based on greed and convenience. I'm acting based on evidence and justice. As Lucille implemented his instructions, Dominic monitored the cascading effects. News outlets were beginning to connect the various investigations, painting a picture of widespread fraud involving Beatrice, Naomi, and Roland Mercer. Financial regulators were expanding their inquiry to include all entities connected to the trio. Law enforcement agencies were coordinating their efforts, suggesting criminal conspiracy charges were being considered. By nightfall, the destruction was comprehensive. Beatrice had been released from questioning, but was facing multiple investigations. Naomi had been named as a co-conspirator in the foundation fraud. Roland Mercer was in federal custody, his empire crumbling as investors fled and regulators circled. Percy, despite his attempts to distance himself, was facing professional ethics investigations that would likely end his legal career. The final piece came at 9:47 p.m., a frantic call from Beatrice to Wallace's home, captured by surveillance. She was sobbing, desperate, begging her father for help. Wallace's response was measured but firm. You made choices, Beatrice. Choices that hurt innocent people, including your own son. I can't protect you from the consequences of those choices. Dominic closed his laptop, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. Phase 1 of justice was complete. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation, face to face with those who had conspired against him, now stripped of their power and pretenses. As he prepared for bed, his phone chimed with a text from Caleb. Grandpa says Mom keeps calling. She sounds really upset. Are you okay? Dominic replied carefully, I'm fine. Try not to worry. Focus on your circuits and stay with Grandpa. I'll see you soon. The boy responded immediately. I trust you, Dad. Those 4 words reinforced Dominic's conviction. Everything he'd done, the surveillance, the strategic releases of information, the coordinated destruction of the conspiracy, had been necessary to protect Caleb and ensure justice. Tomorrow, Beatrice and her co-conspirators would learn the final lesson, that every betrayal carried a cost, and Dominic Harmon always collected in full. Chapter 8, Reckoning. The Fletcher family estate in Wellesley had hosted countless gatherings over the decades: birthday celebrations, holiday dinners, charity galas. Today, it would host a reckoning. Dominic arrived precisely at noon, noting the vehicles already parked in the circular driveway. Beatrice's Audi, Naomi's Mercedes, Percy's BMW. No sign of Roland Mercer's ostentatious Maserati, but that was unsurprising given his current accommodations in federal custody. Marilyn Fletcher opened the door before he could ring the bell, her normally perfect appearance showing signs of strain. Dominic, she said stiffly. They're in the drawing room. Thank you, Marilyn. He stepped into the marble foyer. I appreciate you arranging this meeting. It wasn't my choice, she replied coldly. Wallace insisted. Dominic nodded, understanding her hostility. To Marilyn, he was the architect of her daughter's destruction, regardless of their culpability. Is Caleb here? He's upstairs in the library with Wallace. They're working on some computer project. Her tone softened slightly when mentioning her grandson. He's a remarkable boy. Yes, he is. Dominic removed his coat. Shall we? Marilyn led him to the drawing room, a formal space rarely used except for important occasions. As they entered, the conversation inside abruptly ceased. Beatrice, Naomi, and Percy sat in separate areas of the room, as distant from each other as the space allowed. Beatrice looked up first, her expression hardening at the sight of Dominic. Gone was the polished sophistication she typically projected. Her face was pale, her designer outfit replaced by simple black pants and a sweater. Most telling was the absence of jewelry, presumably liquidated or seized. So you finally show your face, she said, voice brittle with anger. after destroying everything from a safe distance. Dominic took a seat in an armchair facing all three of them. I merely exposed what you created, Beatrice. The destruction is entirely of your own making. Naomi made a scoffing sound. Unlike her sister, she still maintained a veneer of composure, though the strain showed in the tightness around her eyes. Spare us the self-righteousness. You systematically targeted everyone in this room. Correction, Dominic replied calmly. You all systematically conspired against me and my son. I responded appropriately. Percy, looking diminished in his rumpled suit, spoke up. I was peripheral to their plans. I never intended. Save it, Percy, Dominic cut him off. Your legal advice facilitated financial fraud across multiple jurisdictions. Your attempts to claim ignorance have already been contradicted by Roland Mercer's testimony. Percy blanched. Mercer is lying to save himself. Perhaps partly, Dominic conceded. But the evidence speaks for itself. The emails, the financial transfers, the structured transactions, all bearing your digital fingerprints. Why are we here, Dominic? Beatrice demanded. To watch you gloat? To hear your victory speech now that you've ruined us. You're here because Wallace requested this meeting. He believes, perhaps optimistically, that a direct conversation might lead to some resolution that minimizes further damage. Naomi leaned forward. Further damage? You've frozen our assets, triggered multiple investigations, destroyed our reputations, and dismantled our lives. What further damage could possibly remain? Dominic smiled thinly. Criminal charges that carry significant prison sentences, for one. International financial sanctions that would follow you even if you somehow escaped prosecution here. Complete dissolution of all trusts and inheritance provisions. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Beatrice was the first to recover. What do you want? There must be something, or you wouldn't be here. I want what I've always wanted, justice and protection for my son. Dominic crossed his legs casually. Caleb deserves to grow up without the shadow of his mother's criminal activities hanging over him. He deserves financial security that isn't tainted by fraud. And you get to decide what that looks like. Beatrice's voice rose. You orchestrated this entire nightmare to punish us. Not punishment. Consequences. Dominic remained calm. At Thanksgiving, you and Naomi called your husband and son dogs who didn't deserve silverware. You revealed your true contempt, thinking yourselves untouchable. That symbolic gesture was merely the visible tip of a much larger betrayal. He reached into his briefcase and removed a folder. This contains divorce terms that I believe are fair under the circumstances. Full custody of Caleb with me. No alimony. Division of assets that reflects the reality of your financial misconduct. Beatrice didn't reach for the folder. And if I refuse, then the criminal investigations continue unimpeded. The evidence I've withheld from authorities, and yes, there is more, will be released. You'll face the maximum penalties for your actions. This is blackmail, Naomi interjected. This is negotiation, Dominic corrected. I'm offering a path that allows some measure of damage control. It's more consideration than any of you planned to show me. Percy, ever the lawyer despite his current predicament, asked, what specifically are you offering in exchange for accepting these terms? I will not actively assist prosecutors beyond what I've already provided. Certain evidence regarding the most serious potential charges would remain private. Dominic placed 3 additional folders on the coffee table. There are separate agreements for each of you, reflecting your specific levels of involvement. Naomi reached for hers first, professional instinct overriding family loyalty. Her eyes widened as she reviewed the contents. This would still leave me financially ruined. It would leave you financially diminished, but not destitute, Dominic corrected. More importantly, it would significantly reduce your criminal exposure. Percy examined his folder next, the color draining from his face. The Bar Association would still likely disbar me. Professional consequences are outside my control, Dominic said. But yes, your legal career is probably over. Consider it the cost of abandoning legal ethics. Beatrice still hadn't touched her folder. And what about Caleb? You're proposing to completely remove me from his life. I'm proposing custody arrangements that reflect reality, Dominic replied evenly. You've shown minimal interest in him for years. You dismissed him as a problem to be managed after your planned divorce. You were willing to use him as leverage for financial gain. He's still my son. Biology doesn't equal parenthood, Beatrice. Actions do. Dominic leaned forward. The agreement allows for supervised visitation after a 6-month period, contingent on psychological evaluation and Caleb's wishes. Beatrice finally reached for the folder, her hands trembling slightly as she reviewed the documents. This is punitive, and you know it. It's considerably more generous than what you planned for me. Dominic stood. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, the offers are withdrawn and events proceed without intervention. As he moved toward the door, Wallace entered, his expression grave. Have you reached any resolution? They're considering their options, Dominic replied. Where's Caleb? Still upstairs. He's been asking about you. I'll go up to see him. Dominic paused in the doorway, addressing the 3 subdued figures. One last thing. Roland Mercer sends his regards from federal custody. He's been quite cooperative with authorities, particularly regarding the Costa Rica property and the pharmaceutical distribution network. This final piece of information visibly devastated Beatrice. She sank back into her chair, the last vestiges of defiance crumbling. Upstairs, Dominic found Caleb absorbed in programming, multiple code windows open on the computer screen. The boy looked up as he entered, his face brightening. Dad, are you done with your meeting? For now. Dominic sat beside him. What are you working on? A facial recognition algorithm. Grandpa's been helping me optimize it. Caleb hesitated. Mom's downstairs, isn't she? With Aunt Naomi and Uncle Percy. Yes, they are. We needed to discuss some important matters. Caleb's perceptive gaze studied him. About what's going to happen next. With the divorce and everything. That's part of it. Dominic put an arm around his son's shoulders. I know this is difficult and confusing, but I promise things will get better. We'll build a new normal, just you and me. What about Mom? Is she going to jail? Dominic chose his words carefully. That depends on several factors, including choices she makes in the next day or so. But whatever happens, it's the result of her actions, not yours. Caleb nodded, processing this. The missing forks at Thanksgiving. That was when you knew, wasn't it? That's what Grandpa's signal was about. Impressed by his son's insight, Dominic nodded. That was when I received confirmation of what I'd begun to suspect. The forks were symbolic, a small display of contempt that revealed a much larger pattern. And what was under the table? I saw you reach down. Evidence your grandfather had gathered. Documentation of everything that was happening behind the scenes. Caleb was quiet for a moment. So all of this, Mom and Aunt Naomi being in trouble, the investigations, it all started because they didn't give us forks at Thanksgiving dinner? Dominic smiled slightly. No, buddy. It started long before that. The forks were just the moment when they showed their hand too clearly. Sometimes small disrespects reveal larger betrayals. The boy considered this with remarkable maturity. In my coding class, we learned that small errors in the program often point to fundamental flaws in the design. That's a perfect analogy, Dominic agreed. Now, why don't you save your work? We should be heading out soon. Are we going home? Not yet. We'll be staying at a hotel for a few days while some things get sorted out. It'll be like an extended vacation. Caleb began closing his programs. Dad, thanks for being honest with me about what's happening. Most adults would just say everything's fine when it isn't. Dominic felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness that his 12-year-old had to deal with such adult situations. You deserve the truth, always. Just remember that you're the most important person in all of this to me. Everything I've done has been to protect you. As they prepared to leave, Wallace pulled Dominic aside for a final word. Beatrice is asking to speak with you alone before you go. Dominic hesitated. Is that wise? Probably not, Wallace admitted. But it might provide some closure. For both of you. After ensuring Caleb was safely occupied helping Marilyn with something in the kitchen, Dominic returned to the drawing room. Beatrice sat alone now, staring out the window at the manicured grounds. Wallace said you wanted to speak with me, Dominic said, remaining by the door. Beatrice turned, her expression unreadable. I've reviewed the agreement. I'll sign it. That's sensible. Not because I think it's fair, she clarified, a flash of the old Beatrice surfacing, but because I recognize when I'm outmaneuvered. Dominic nodded. I'll have my attorney contact yours tomorrow to finalize the details. She studied him, something like grudging respect in her eyes. I underestimated you, Dominic. We all did. We saw your integrity as weakness, your dedication to Caleb as lack of ambition. That was your mistake. Clearly. She looked down at her hands, bare of the rings and bracelets she'd always worn. When did you first suspect? Nearly a year ago. Small inconsistencies, unexplained absences, financial discrepancies. Dominic leaned against the doorframe. But suspicion isn't action. I needed evidence, which your father eventually provided. And you've been planning this, response, all this time? No. I considered multiple approaches. The comprehensive dismantling of your conspiracy became necessary only when I understood the full scope of what you intended for me. And for Caleb. At the mention of their son, Beatrice flinched. I never wanted to hurt him. But you were willing to use him, which amounts to the same thing. Dominic's voice hardened. The agreement allows for eventual visitation because Caleb deserves the opportunity to know his mother. But make no mistake, if you ever attempt to manipulate him or harm him emotionally, even that limited access will end. You've thought of everything, haven't you? That's what you never understood about me, Beatrice. Thoroughness isn't just my professional habit, it's who I am. Dominic straightened. One last thing. The forks at Thanksgiving. Was that your idea or Naomi's? A bitter smile crossed her face. Does it matter? We both thought it was amusing at the time. A small power play. It matters only historically. It was the catalyst that set everything else in motion. Dominic turned to leave. Goodbye, Beatrice. My attorney will be in touch. As he collected Caleb and prepared to depart, Dominic reflected on the symmetry of it all. The conspiracy had begun with small disrespects that grew into major betrayals. His response had begun with small investigations that culminated in complete justice. The reckoning was nearly complete. All that remained was the aftermath, rebuilding a life for himself and Caleb from the wreckage of betrayal. Unlike Beatrice and her co-conspirators, Dominic had always understood that actions had consequences. Now, everyone involved understood it too. Chapter 9, Silver Linings. 6 months later, on a warm June afternoon, Dominic stood on the deck of his new lakeside home in New Hampshire, watching Caleb program a small drone to follow automated flight patterns over the water. The property, purchased after the divorce was finalized, represented their fresh start, away from Boston and its painful associations, but close enough to maintain relationships with Wallace and Marilyn. The past months had brought monumental changes. The divorce had proceeded as outlined in Dominic's agreement, giving him full custody of Caleb and a fair division of untainted assets. Beatrice had avoided the most serious criminal charges, but received 5 years probation and substantial community service requirements for financial improprieties related to the foundation. Naomi had fared worse, receiving a 3-year prison sentence for her more direct involvement in Roland Mercer's pharmaceutical scheme. Percy had been disbarred and was working at a paralegal training program as part of his own plea agreement. Roland Mercer, having attempted to implicate everyone else to save himself, discovered that federal prosecutors had little sympathy for the mastermind. He was currently serving the first year of a 12-year sentence for fraud, money laundering, and FDA violations. Wallace and Marilyn had weathered the storm with surprising resilience. After the initial shock and public embarrassment, they had focused their attention on Caleb, becoming more involved grandparents than ever before. They visited the New Hampshire house monthly, with Wallace and Caleb continuing their electronics projects. Dominic's security consulting business had actually flourished in the aftermath, his methodical dismantling of the conspiracy against him serving as an impressive, if unofficial, case study in threat neutralization. He had scaled back to select clients, prioritizing time with Caleb and establishing their new life. Dad, watch this, Caleb called, executing a complex series of commands that sent the drone spiraling upward in a perfect helix before returning to hover before them. Impressive, Dominic said genuinely. You've really mastered the stabilization algorithms. Caleb beamed at the praise. At 13 now, he was growing taller, his confidence expanding along with his height. The trauma of the family implosion had left its mark, certainly, but therapy and Dominic's consistent support had helped him process the events healthily. Grandpa's coming tomorrow, right? Caleb asked, guiding the drone back to its landing pad. Yes, for the whole weekend. He mentioned bringing some new circuit boards for your robot project. Caleb nodded, then hesitated. And, Mom, is she still coming for lunch on Sunday? The supervised visitation had begun 2 months earlier, after Beatrice completed the required psychological evaluation. The visits were still awkward, with Beatrice struggling to connect with a son she had previously marginalized. But Caleb, with remarkable maturity, was giving her the opportunity to rebuild some kind of relationship. Yes, from noon to 3, with Ms. Chambers supervising as usual. Dominic kept his tone neutral. Whatever his feelings about Beatrice, he would never undermine Caleb's relationship with his mother. How are you feeling about that? Caleb shrugged, powering down his controller. Okay, I guess. It's still weird. She tries too hard sometimes, bringing expensive gifts and talking about trips we could take someday. But last time was better. She actually asked about my coding projects and seemed to really listen. That's progress, Dominic acknowledged. Remember, you set the pace for these visits. If anything makes you uncomfortable, you tell Miss Chambers or me immediately. I know, Dad. Caleb picked up the drone. I'm going to upload the flight data and analyze it. The right stabilizer still has a slight wobble. As his son disappeared into the house, Dominic reflected on how far they had come. The night after the confrontation at the Fletcher estate, they had stayed in a hotel suite, Caleb subdued and uncertain about the future. Dominic had ordered room service, and when their meal arrived, Caleb had stared at the table setting with an odd expression. What is it, buddy? Dominic had asked. We both have forks, Caleb had said quietly. It shouldn't seem strange, but it does. The observation, so simple yet profound, had nearly broken Dominic's heart. Such a small thing, proper silverware, that most people took for granted had become symbolic for both of them. That night, Dominic had made a silent promise. Their new life would be built on respect, honesty, and unwavering support. The missing forks at Thanksgiving had revealed a family broken beyond repair, but from those fragments, he and Caleb would forge something stronger. Dominic's phone buzzed with a text from Wallace, arriving around noon tomorrow. Marilyn sending her famous lasagna with me. How's Caleb doing with the upcoming visit? He responded, handling it well. Getting better each time. See you tomorrow. As he pocketed his phone, Dominic noticed a sleek Audi pulling into the driveway, Vincent Lombardo's car. The private investigator had become a friend during the intense months of the operation, and now occasionally joined them for dinner when in the area. Vincent emerged from the vehicle, carrying a bottle of wine and what appeared to be a small package. Evening, Dominic. Hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. Caleb's inside analyzing drone data. Perfect timing for an adult conversation. Dominic gestured to the chairs on the deck. What brings you up this way? Vincent set down his offerings and took a seat. Partly social, partly professional. Thought you might want an update on recent developments. I'm listening. Roland Mercer was transferred to a lower security facility last week after providing additional information about international connections. Vincent's expression was professionally neutral. In apparently unrelated news, several offshore accounts connected to his operation experienced technical issues, resulting in the loss of approximately $30 million. Dominic raised an eyebrow. How unfortunate for him. Indeed. Vincent allowed himself a small smile. Also, Percy Cooper has relocated to Minneapolis. New name, new identity, courtesy of some friends in the U.S. Marshal Service. Apparently, he provided information significant enough to warrant protection. And Naomi? Adjusting to institutional life with predictable difficulty. No special accommodations or early release prospects. Vincent glanced toward the house. Beatrice continues her community service at the women's shelter downtown. Her supervisor reports she's actually becoming quite committed to the work, possibly finding some redemption there. Dominic nodded, unsurprised. Beatrice had always been adaptable. And Wallace and Marilyn? Coping admirably. They've redirected their philanthropic efforts toward educational initiatives, particularly in STEM fields. I believe your son's influence is evident there. He would be pleased to hear that. Dominic gestured to the package Vincent had brought. And what's this? Vincent handed it over. Something I thought you might appreciate. A symbolic gesture, if you will. Dominic unwrapped the small box to find a set of sterling silver forks, elegantly crafted and monogrammed with H for Harmon. I had them custom-made, Vincent explained. A reminder that sometimes the smallest slights reveal the largest betrayals, and that justice, while sometimes delayed, is ultimately served. Dominic ran his finger along the polished silver. Perfect. Thank you, Vincent. Caleb emerged from the house, tablet in hand. Hi, Mr. Lombardo. Dad, I fixed the stabilization issue. Want to see the before and after data? Absolutely, Dominic replied, setting the silver forks aside. Show us what you've accomplished. As Caleb enthusiastically explained his technical solution, Dominic felt a profound sense of peace. The reckoning was complete. Justice had been served. The conspirators had faced consequences proportionate to their betrayals. Most importantly, he and Caleb were building a new life, one where missing forks at Thanksgiving had led, ironically, to silver linings neither could have anticipated. The path had been brutal, the justice severe, but the outcome was undeniable. They were stronger, closer, and more secure than ever before. Later that evening, after Vincent departed and Caleb went to bed, Dominic placed the silver forks in the dining room drawer. They would serve as a reminder, not of betrayal, but of resilience. Not of what had been lost, but of what had been gained. In the quiet of his new home, Dominic Harmon smiled. The missing forks at Thanksgiving dinner had been intended as a symbol of his powerlessness. Instead, they had become the catalyst for demonstrating his most fundamental quality. When betrayed, he offered no forgiveness, only consequences. As Wallace had observed months earlier, Dominic had indeed thought of everything. And in doing so, he had ensured that justice, like properly polished silver, would shine brilliantly in the end. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.